I nearly wore shorts today. This close, this close. I'll just have to suffer with the heat so you didn't have to suffer with my legs. So there we go. For those of you who don't know me, hi, I'm Paul and I'm on team here at Garden City Vineyard. Now we're going to jump straight into it this morning as we've got a lot to cover. So if you've got a Bible with you, go ahead and open it up to John 21. Keep your finger there or you bookmark it or however. We will get there in a moment. But whilst you do that, let me just get everybody up to speed. So today, we are finishing our series where we've been looking at the life of Peter. And over a few weeks, we've been walking through different moments in his journey with Jesus. The highs, the lows, and the very human middle bits. So who was Peter? Well, Peter was, as I'm sure we know, one of Jesus' 12 disciples. But he's also the one who gets it spectacularly right one moment and spectacularly wrong the next. He's the outspoken one, the blurt it out before you think one, which is probably why so many of us feel that we can relate to him. And Peter wasn't even his original name. He was originally given, his original name was Simon, and he's a fisherman by trade. But one day, Jesus looks at him and says, "You are Simon, but you will be called Cephas," which is Aramaic for rock. And in Greek, it's Petros, Peter. And in the Bible, when God renames someone, it's never just cosmetic, it's prophetic. So Jesus sees something in Simon that Simon doesn't yet see in himself. It's like he's saying, you might feel unstable, hot-headed, all over the place, but I see a rock, a foundation, someone I can build upon. And last week we looked at probably one of the most sobering moments in Peter's life. It's the night before Jesus is arrested. Peter's insisting he'll stand by Jesus no matter what, even if it costs him his life. But Jesus tells him straight, before the rooster crows, you'll deny me 3 times. And sure enough, after Jesus is arrested and taken to the high priest's house, Peter follows, but at a distance. And in the courtyard, people begin to recognize him. Aren't you one of his disciples, they say? And he says, no, I don't know the man. And it happens again and again. And just as Peter speaks the third denial, the rooster crows. And across the courtyard, Jesus turns and catches his eye. Peter realizes exactly what has happened. And he leaves weeping bitterly. From there, the story moves on quickly. Jesus is tried, crucified, buried in a borrowed tomb. But then on the Sunday morning, the women go to tend his body and they find the stone rolled away, the grave clothes lying there, and an empty tomb. Jesus has risen. And over the days that follow, he appears several times to the disciples. Which brings us to today's passage, where Jesus appears to them for the 3rd time since his resurrection. And what we're going to see today is Peter being restored, brought back from failure into calling. So when you hear the word restored or restoration, what comes to mind? Maybe it's an old house being repaired, a piece of furniture being brought back to life, or something broken being made whole again. One dictionary definition puts it like this: the action of returning to something to its former owner, place, or condition. And in this story, we're going to watch Jesus do exactly that with a man who thought he was finished. I want to read the whole thing in one go and not to interrupt it or explain it just yet. So just to hear it as it happened. So if we start in John 21, verse 1, and the words will be up on screen, and they already are. Fantastic. Okay, verse 1. Afterwards, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, also known as Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, and the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. I'm going out to fish, Simon Peter said to them, and they said, we'll go with you. So they went out and got into the boat. But that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize it was Jesus. He called out to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment round him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 meters. When they landed, they saw a fire burning coals there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. So Simon Peter climbed back into the boat and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, come and have breakfast. None of the disciples dared ask him, who are you? They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Yes, Lord, he said, you know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my lambs. Again Jesus said, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He answered, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Jesus said, take care of my sheep. The 3rd time he said to him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the 3rd time, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. Jesus said, feed my sheep. Very truly I tell you, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands and someone else will dress you and lead you where you do not want to go. Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. Then he said to him, follow me. What a moment. It's quiet, but it's significant. There's a charcoal fire, some food on the grill, a conversation that's been waiting to happen. And Jesus asked Peter the same question, not once, but 3 times. It's not dramatic, it's not confrontational, but it's not casual either. And Peter doesn't get a sermon. He doesn't get told off. He doesn't get sat down for a spiritual debrief. He gets fish, bread, and a conversation that's going to change the rest of his life. So let's slow down and walk back through what's just happened. Because this isn't just about Peter. This is also about how Jesus restores us as well. Whether your failure is fresh or old or still hidden under the surface, Jesus meets us in the middle of it. I want to draw out 3 points, 3 things that restoration looks like in this story. It's not a formula, but a pattern we can recognize, I think, in our own lives. So point 1 is restoration begins by remembering God's goodness. Let's go back to the beginning of the passage. The disciples are out fishing, not just for fun, but because they don't know what else to do. Jesus is alive, yes, but everything's changed. The clarity that they once had has gone. And it's Peter who says, I'm going fishing. And that's not a practical decision, it's emotional. It sounds like someone saying, I messed up. I don't know what comes next. I'll just go back to what I know. So they fish all night and nothing, not even a soggy boot. The nets are empty, and it's more than just frustrating. It's a picture of where Peter's at. He's tired, uncertain, carrying failure, and unsure what Jesus might say to him if he says anything at all. And then in the early morning, Jesus is there on the shore, and he doesn't wait until Peter's got himself sorted. He doesn't call him out. He simply says, throw your net on the right side. And those words, they'd be familiar because this isn't the first time something like this has happened. It mirrors the moment that Jesus first called Peter back in Luke 5. Same lake, same situation, nothing all night. And then Jesus gives him a simple instruction, and suddenly the nets are full. Jesus doesn't give Peter a new miracle. He gives him a reminder of who he is, a reminder of how this all started. Not Jesus correcting Peter, but Jesus repeating the miracle, the same words, the same nets, the same abundance. It's like he's saying, Peter, remember, this is where it began. This is who I am. And sometimes that's how Jesus works with us too. He brings us back to something familiar, a verse that we once clung to, or a moment of answered prayer, a memory of his goodness. And he uses it to remind us of what we've forgotten. That he's faithful, that he hasn't changed, not to confront us, but to remind us. Have you ever gone back to somewhere familiar, a childhood home, an old school, a job you used to have? It can feel strange, can't it? The place hasn't changed much, but you have. Being there stirs something in you. Memories surface, things you'd forgotten come back to mind. And that's what's happening with Peter. The moment feels familiar. The nets, the fish, the voice telling him where to cast. He pulls him back to the beginning, to the first time he knew Jesus was more than just a teacher. And Jesus isn't rubbing Peter's failure in his face. He's reminding him of who he is, reminding him of God's goodness, bringing him back to where it all began. And for some of us, that might be what Jesus is doing this morning. Maybe your nets feel empty. You've been doing all the right things, showing up, praying, crying, but something's not quite clicking. Or maybe you've gone back to what's familiar because it feels safer than facing the unknown. But Jesus doesn't stand at a distance. He comes close. He brings to mind what you've forgotten. He reminds you of who he is and how faithful he's been. And maybe that's the invitation today, not to push forward, but to remember. Lamentations 3 puts it like this: Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. That's how restoration begins. Not with trying to fix everything, not with pretending we're doing better than we are, but by calling to mind the goodness of God and remembering that his faithfulness hasn't changed. But it doesn't stop there. Because restoration isn't just about remembering, it's also about responding. which leads us to point 2. Restoration grows through obedience. So Peter swims to shore. He's dripping wet. The fire's crackling. There's fish already cooking. And they eat together. In silence, I imagine. The kind that's heavy with unspoken things. And then Jesus speaks. But before that conversation happens, there's this moment that's easy to overlook. Verse 6, Jesus says, throw your net on the right side of the boat. And they do it. That's the moment of obedience. They could have dismissed it. We've tried that all night. They could have said, this is the guy. Who's this guy on the beach? But they don't. They simply do what he says. And as a result, a net so full, they can barely haul it in. Then in verse 7, Peter hears it's the Lord, grabs his coat, because obviously what you want for a good swim is an extra layer, and flings himself into the water. It's classic Peter, actually. Heart first, brain still somewhere in the boat. But by verse 11, he's back in the boat, dragging the whole net ashore by himself. 153 fish. John includes the exact number. Like you're saying, we counted. This really happened. We counted them. And here's the thing. The fish didn't come because Peter had a great attitude, or because he felt forgiven, or because he had some big emotional breakthrough. The fish came because he obeyed. And I think we forget that sometimes. We want the moment, the breakthrough, the clarity, and all of that matters. But often restoration grows from something simple. Doing what Jesus says. Not because it's impressive, not because it earns anything, but because obedience realigns us. It recenters us. It softens something in us and reminds us who's actually leading. It's not about ticking boxes. It's not about trying harder. It's about trusting that Jesus knows what he's doing, even when it doesn't make sense. I remember someone once telling me how they felt God nudging them to call a person that they hadn't spoken to in years, and they didn't want to. There was history. It would have been easier just to leave it, but the nudge didn't go away. And they made the call. And it turned out that that person that they called was in a real place of pain. Real pain. And that one act of obedience opened the door for healing. Not just for them, but for both of them. This is often how it works. It's not always obvious. It's rarely dramatic. But something gets restored when we simply do what Jesus says. So let me just ask this gently. Is there something Jesus has already asked you to do that you haven't done yet? It might not be public. It might not even feel spiritual. But maybe the next step, the peace, the clarity, the restoration, is sitting on the other side of that small act of obedience, that small act of faithfulness. Be it a phone call, a conversation you've been avoiding, a sin brought into the light, a yes you've been putting off. Obedience rarely looks impressive, but it is always powerful. And in Peter's case, obedience didn't just fill the nets, it prepared him for what Jesus was about to say next. Because this moment isn't just about fish, it's about trust. It's about being brought back into the story. Jesus wasn't just helping Peter feel better. He was calling him back into purpose, back into leadership, back into grace. And that's still true for us. Obedience isn't just about feeling spiritually okay again. It's about stepping into what God is doing in us and through us. A quote by someone called N.T. Wright, you won't have heard him before, puts it like this: Jesus is raised, therefore God's new world has begun. And therefore we, as followers of Jesus, have a job to do. And it's not just about sitting back and waiting to go to heaven when we die. In other words, restoration is never the end of the story. It's the beginning of something new. So if you're longing for more of Jesus, maybe the place to begin isn't more effort. It's asking the simple question, Lord, what have you already said? And how can I respond to that today? So obedience brings us back into alignment. It's how restoration begins to take root. And for Peter and for many of us, there's something else needed, which leads us to the final point, point 3. Restoration happens when we receive Jesus' forgiveness. That's not just agree to it in theory, not just tell others it's true, but actually receive it, actually let it land. Picture the moment, the meal's finished, the fire is burning low, the conversation that everyone's been avoiding is about to begin. And Jesus turns to Peter. He doesn't say, let's go over what happened. He doesn't ask for an explanation. He simply says, Simon, son of John, do you love me? He doesn't even call him Peter. The name he gave him, he goes back to his original name, Simon. It's like he's stripping things back. No titles, no expectations, just, do you love me? Peter says, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And Jesus replies, feed my lambs. Then he asks again and again, 3 times. And by the 3rd time, Peter's hurt. Not because Jesus is being harsh, but because he knows exactly what this is. 3 denials, 3 questions, 3 chances to say, I love you. This isn't punishment. This is Jesus giving Peter a chance to unsay what he said on the worst night of his life. And here's what's striking. Jesus never actually says the words, I forgive you. He doesn't have to. It's already happening. Forgiveness is in the fire. It's in the breakfast. It's in the familiar setting. It's in the fact that Jesus brings Peter back to the moment of failure, not to rub it in, but to heal it. The last time Peter was around a charcoal fire, he denied even knowing Jesus. Now here he is, next to another fire, hearing Jesus say, feed my sheep, follow me. It's personal, but it's also public. Because remember, the others are there. They need to hear it too. Jesus is restoring Peter in front of them because Peter's calling is going to affect them too. They need to know he's not disqualified, that the denial doesn't get the final word. And that's what Jesus still does. He doesn't restore us quietly so we can slip back into the background. He restores us with grace and clarity so we can step into what he's called us to. You're not just forgiven. You're trusted again. You're invited again. No downgrade, no backup role, just follow me. And maybe you've been carrying something you regret, something you did or something you didn't do that still casts a shadow. And maybe you believe Jesus forgives you in theory, but you've never really let it land. You've never heard him say, I know what happened. I still love you. I'm not finished with you. That's what restoration does. It doesn't just give you peace. It puts you back into purpose. Peter the denier becomes Peter the preacher. Just a few weeks after this moment, Peter stands up in Jerusalem and tells the story of Jesus with clarity and courage, and 3,000 people come to faith. That's what Jesus does with someone who's been forgiven and knows it. So maybe today your next step isn't to do more, it's to receive, to let him speak again. Do you love me? Not to trap you, but to free you, to move you forward. Not just clean, but called. So let's step back and take in the whole story. Peter, the loud one, the bold one, the one who swore he'd never walk away, finds himself on a beach face to face with the one that he failed. And what does Jesus do? He doesn't disqualify him. He doesn't ignore the failure. He restores him. Jesus reminds Peter of what's always been true, that God is good. He invites Peter to take a step of obedience, and he leads him into forgiveness. And I think that's the pattern for us too, because this isn't a story just about Peter. This is how Jesus deals with any of us who've blown it, which, if we're being honest, is all of us. So maybe for you, this is about remembering, calling to mind the goodness of God, going back to where it all began. Maybe it's about obedience, the small thing he's already asked you to do that you've been putting off. Or maybe, and this is the hardest one for some of us, it's about receiving. Laying down the shame, letting go of the inner critic, and trusting that when Jesus says, "Follow me," he really means it. Because you're not a write-off. You're not too far gone. You haven't missed it. Jesus is on the shore. The fire is ready, and he's inviting you not just to be forgiven, but to follow again. Because as John Wimber, the founder of this movement we call the Vineyard, once said, the economy of the kingdom is simple. Each new step in your walk with God requires new obedience, new willingness to let go, and new trust in him. And sometimes that obedience looks big and public, a bold decision, a major change, a step of faith everyone sees. Other times it's smaller, quieter. It's doing the next right thing when no one's watching. Throwing the net out again even though you're tired. Or wading awkwardly towards Jesus in a soaking coat because, well, you just needed to be near him. I'm still not entirely sure why Peter put the coat on before swimming, but his heart was definitely in the right place. The point is, when Jesus says, "Follow me," we don't have to be polished. We just have to be willing. So if you're able to, then please stand.